Royal Guard breaks into Camilla's closet after Princess Charlotte's secret signal. It was an unusually calm morning at the palace. The sun had just begun to peek over the rooftops of London, casting a soft, golden light on the grand walls and gardens. Inside, the royal household was already awake, moving quietly through the corridors with practiced routine. The aroma of fresh flowers mingled with the scent of polished wood and the faint smell of early breakfast being prepared in the kitchens. The palace, usually echoing with footsteps and chatter, felt unusually peaceful, as if the world outside had paused for a brief moment. Princess Charlotte was already awake in her private quarters, her small figure curled up on a window seat with a view of the palace gardens. Her chestnut hair fell gently over her shoulders, slightly messy from sleep, and her big, curious eyes were bright with anticipation. Charlotte loved mornings like this, quiet, still, and filled with endless possibilities. She could hear the distant rustle of the gardeners tending the flowers and the soft chatter of palace staff preparing for the day. But the princess had other thoughts on her mind. She had noticed something interesting the day before, something that made her mind buzz with curiosity. From her vantage point, Charlotte could see the fine details of the palace garden. She loved spotting the little things that most adults seem to ignore. The way a bird tilted its head while hopping along a branch, the tiny flowers growing stubbornly through the cracks in the cobblestone paths, and the neat rows of hedges that looked like they were drawn with invisible lines. But today her attention was not on the garden. Her eyes were fixed on the window of a different part of the palace, Camilla's private quarters. Charlotte had always been fascinated by the Duchess's closet, filled with dresses that sparkled and shoes that looked like tiny works of art. She could only imagine what it would be like to peek inside, to see the colors, textures, and patterns up close. Charlotte had a mischievous streak, one that often made her adults sigh or laugh quietly behind closed doors. She had learned that small actions could sometimes create big reactions, and she loved testing this out in safe ways. Today, her plan was simple, yet daring. She would signal someone trusted and disciplined, to help her satisfy her curiosity. The problem was she had to do it without being noticed because Camilla valued her privacy dearly, and Charlotte knew she had to respect that. She took a deep breath and tilted her head slightly. Her small hand moved in a series of practiced gestures, tapping the windowsill twice, then a gentle wink. To any ordinary observer, it might have looked like a simple stretch or a signal to herself. But to the trained eye of the palace guard stationed nearby, it was a clear message. Charlotte had learned these subtle signals from watching her parents and the staff. There were codes, patterns, and tiny movements that could communicate volumes without words. She had seen her older siblings practice them, and she had perfected her own version. Meanwhile, Camilla had just returned from a charity event. She was dressed elegantly in a simple, stylish coat, her hair perfectly in place despite the long day she had just endured. She placed her handbag on a table and hummed softly, relieved to be back in the quiet of her personal space. Her closet, always a place of comfort and order, awaited her next selection of outfits. She opened the door to glance at her collection, making mental notes for future engagements, completely unaware that a small drama was quietly unfolding elsewhere in the palace. The palace staff moved about with quiet efficiency, unaware of the tiny signal that had just been sent. The guard assigned to Charlotte's quarters, a man of impeccable discipline and reputation, noticed the princess's gesture. He had been trained to recognize subtle signs and respond appropriately. Though he initially paused, unsure of the situation, his instincts told him that something needed to be done. Obedience, duty, and a sense of loyalty guided him as he quietly prepared to act. Charlotte watched carefully, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She could feel her heart beating faster, not out of fear, but out of excitement. She loved the feeling of control that came with her small, secret plan. Every little detail mattered. The timing of the tap, the angle of her wink, the calmness in her expression. She had rehearsed this in her mind, imagining how the guard would respond and how the Duchess might react. Each possibility made her giggle quietly to herself. From her perch, Charlotte could see the guard moving with careful precision. His steps were quiet, but his posture remained perfect, straight and attentive. He approached the hallway leading to Camilla's quarters, pausing occasionally to ensure that no other staff member noticed his unusual path. Charlotte suppressed a giggle as she watched him, her small hands gripping the edge of the window seat. Everything was going exactly as she had imagined, and that made her feel clever, almost like a tiny general overseeing a very important operation. Camilla, still unaware of the unfolding events, continued her routine. She selected a scarf to match her coat and began planning her day ahead. The palace was filled with the soft sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional clink of porcelain from the breakfast area. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Yet the ordinary was about to be disrupted by a small, clever princess and her understanding of palace protocols. Charlotte's mind raced with possibilities. What would the guard do once he reached the door? How would Camilla react if someone entered her private space unexpectedly? She imagined all the scenarios, laughing softly at some and smiling at others. There was a thrill in this small adventure, a sense of power that came from knowing she had set something important in motion with nothing more than a tiny gesture. The palace itself seemed almost aware of the impending excitement. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, highlighting the intricate designs on the carpets and the polished surfaces of the furniture. The paintings on the walls seemed to look down in quiet judgment, and the chandeliers sparkled as though anticipating the unfolding events. In this moment, the palace was both a majestic home and a stage for a tiny drama orchestrated by a clever child. Charlotte's curiosity was not merely about the closet or the dresses. It was about understanding, observing, and testing boundaries in a world that often seemed vast and impenetrable. Her small gestures, her careful planning, and her secretive excitement reflected a mind that was curious, intelligent, and playful all at once. She was learning lessons about responsibility, discretion, and the power of observation, lessons that would serve her well in the years to come. By the time the guard reached the hallway leading to Camilla's quarters, Charlotte was ready. She sat quietly, almost holding her breath, as the final moments of her plan approached. The ordinary morning had transformed into something extraordinary, a quiet adventure unfolding in the heart of the palace. Charlotte smiled to herself, proud of her cleverness and eager to see the next part of her plan come to life. The morning continued, serene on the surface, but charged with a subtle tension that only Charlotte seemed to notice. Each tick of the clock brought the guard closer. Each rustle of fabric signaled progress, and each distant voice reminded her that the palace was alive and full of stories waiting to be told. In her small, patient way, Charlotte understood the balance between action and observation, between secrecy and revelation. She was learning that even the tiniest gestures could have remarkable consequences. And so, as the sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the palace halls, Princess Charlotte remained perched on her window seat, a quiet smile on her face, fully aware that today was no ordinary day. Something was about to happen, something that would stir the calm morning into a moment of intrigue, curiosity, and a touch of playful mischief. For Charlotte, this was more than just a peek into a closet. It was a lesson in patience, planning, and the subtle art of influence. Princess Charlotte waited patiently by the window, her small hands clasped together on her lap. She felt a quiet thrill as the minutes passed. From her vantage point, she could see the polished floors of the hallway stretching toward Camilla's private quarters. The palace, which usually seemed calm and orderly, now felt charged with anticipation. Every sound, the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the soft murmur of staff in conversation, and even the whisper of her own breath, seemed louder, more important. Charlotte's eyes sparkled with excitement. Today she was part of a tiny adventure, one that required patience, observation, and cleverness, and she was determined to see it through. The secret signal she had sent was simple but powerful. A small tap on the windowsill, followed by a subtle wink, had communicated everything the palace guard needed to know. The guard, a tall, disciplined man named Thomas, was trained to respond quickly to the princess's gestures. His life at the palace had been one of routine, precision, and unwavering duty. Every day he patrolled the halls, observed the staff, and ensured the security of the royal family. But this time his task was unusual. The signal was subtle, almost playful, yet it demanded immediate attention. Thomas understood the importance of even the smallest gesture from a member of the royal family, and he had learned long ago never to underestimate the intelligence or creativity of Princess Charlotte. Thomas paused in the hallway, adjusting his posture and straightening the cuffs of his uniform. His polished shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as he moved with careful steps toward Camilla's quarters. Every move he made was deliberate, measured, and controlled. He glanced briefly toward the nearby staff, ensuring that no one noticed his unusual path. The palace ran on rules, routines, and schedules, and deviations were rare. But Thomas knew that certain situations, no matter how unusual, required immediate action. A signal from Princess Charlotte was never something to ignore. Meanwhile, Charlotte leaned slightly closer to the window, peeking through the glass. Her brown eyes followed Thomas as he moved steadily down the hallway. She could hardly contain her excitement. Her plan was simple, but it required perfect timing. One wrong move, one loud sound, and her adventure would be over before it even began. She had practiced the gesture carefully, testing it in secret moments over the past weeks, ensuring it would be understood by someone trained to notice the smallest details. Today, her preparation was about to pay off. Camilla in her quarters was unaware of the events unfolding nearby. She moved gracefully, selecting a scarf to match her coat, and humming a soft tune from the charity event she had attended the day before. Her mind was occupied with thoughts of appointments, schedules, and engagements. She had no idea that the quiet morning she enjoyed was about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. The palace, with its centuries of tradition and careful order, was about to become a stage for a small act of mischief, orchestrated by a clever little princess. Thomas approached the door to Camilla's quarters cautiously. He paused, listening for any sounds that might indicate someone was nearby. The soft hum of the heating system, the distant clinking of utensils from the kitchen, and the faint whisper of a distant conversation were the only sounds that reached him. He took a slow, careful breath, reminding himself of his training. His duty was clear: respond to the princess's signal, follow protocol, and ensure that nothing unusual escalated. Yet even with his experience, he couldn't shake a small sense of curiosity about what exactly he might find when he reached the door. Charlotte's heart beat faster. She had never seen Thomas so focused and serious. In her young eyes, he looked like a giant, moving with purpose and determination. She smiled quietly, pleased that her plan was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. The thrill of anticipation was almost as satisfying as the thought of what would happen next. Every second counted, and she understood that patience was just as important as cleverness. As Thomas reached the door, he hesitated for a fraction of a moment. He adjusted his grip on the handle, aware that he was about to enter a space that belonged to someone else, even though his actions were guided by the princess's signal. The palace had rules about privacy and respect, but it also had rules about responding to the royal family's gestures. Thomas knew he had to balance both. He opened the door slowly, ensuring it made no sound, and peeked inside. The room was as elegant as Charlotte had imagined. Shelves lined with neatly folded clothes, racks filled with sparkling dresses, and rows of shoes that looked like tiny jewels filled the space. The colors, textures, and patterns were mesmerizing. Thomas paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the room before remembering his purpose. His eyes scanned carefully, searching for any sign of danger or anything that needed immediate attention. But there was nothing unusual, just the quiet, orderly elegance of Camilla's closet. Charlotte, watching from her window, could hardly contain her excitement. Her eyes widened as she imagined Thomas entering the space. Her small mind raced with possibilities. Would Camilla notice? How would she react? What would happen if Thomas moved a little too quickly or made a sound? Each scenario made Charlotte giggle softly, her hands clutching the edge of the window seat. She felt a sense of power, a thrill that came from orchestrating a small adventure with perfect timing. Camilla, still unaware, continued with her morning routine. She selected a pair of gloves and placed them carefully on a table. Her mind was occupied, and she had no idea that a disciplined palace guard was quietly moving through her private space. The palace, usually a place of predictable routines and schedules, had become a stage for a small drama that only a few people were aware of. The contrast between the calm exterior and the tension of the hidden action made Charlotte's heart race with excitement. Thomas moved carefully through the closet, ensuring he did not disturb anything. His presence was silent, respectful, and disciplined. He understood the importance of discretion and knew that his actions were being guided by the princess's signal. Every step he took was calculated, careful, and deliberate. He examined the room with trained eyes, noticing the arrangement of clothes, the patterns of the dresses, and the order of the shoes. Yet, even with all his experience, he could not help but feel a sense of wonder at the elegance and attention to detail in the room. Charlotte's mind raced with possibilities. What would happen next? Would Thomas find something unusual, or would the adventure end quietly? She leaned forward slightly, her brown eyes shining with excitement. The thrill of anticipation was almost too much to bear. She understood that her signal had started a chain of events that could not be reversed, and she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that her cleverness had set everything in motion. As the minutes passed, the tension in Charlotte's quarters grew. Every sound, every movement, and every shadow seemed significant. She watched Thomas carefully, noting his measured movements and disciplined posture. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that her small gesture had commanded the attention of someone trained to respond to the royal family's signals. The palace, with all its history, tradition, and order, had become the backdrop for a tiny, playful adventure, and Charlotte was at the center of it. Finally, Thomas completed his careful survey of the room. Finding nothing unusual, he paused near the center of the closet, taking a deep breath before preparing to leave. His duty had been fulfilled, guided by the princess's signal, and he moved with the same care and discretion as he had entered. Every step, every gesture, and every decision was measured, precise, and deliberate. He exited the closet quietly, returning to his post with the satisfaction of having completed a task with precision and respect. Charlotte, still at her window, allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Her plan had worked perfectly. The guard had responded exactly as she had hoped, and the quiet tension of the morning had been transformed into a moment of playful success. She understood that the adventure was not just about curiosity or mischief. It was about patience, observation, and the subtle influence of a well-planned gesture. The morning had begun quietly, but it had unfolded into something extraordinary, all because of a small, clever princess and her understanding of the power of subtle signals. The palace felt quieter than usual as Thomas approached Camilla's closet for the second time that morning. His mind was focused, disciplined, and alert, yet there was an unusual sense of tension in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He had completed his initial survey earlier, but the princess's persistent signals had suggested there was more to be noticed, more to be understood. Thomas had learned long ago that royal signals, especially from young members of the family, were never casual or playful in the ordinary sense. They were intentional, precise, and often full of meaning. Princess Charlotte, from her vantage point at the window, watched intently. She had been waiting patiently, her small hands gripping the edge of the window seat as her eyes followed Thomas's careful steps. There was a thrill in seeing her plan unfold. She had orchestrated this subtle communication with care, ensuring that only those who truly understood the signs could act. The excitement bubbled inside her chest, and she suppressed a giggle, knowing that the next moments would be the most interesting part of her little adventure. Thomas paused just outside the door, listening carefully. The soft hum of the palace's heating system, the distant clatter from the kitchens, and the faint murmur of staff in another corridor were the only sounds he could hear. Every nerve in his body was alert, trained to detect even the slightest irregularity. This was not a moment for haste or carelessness. It required patience, precision, and respect. He reminded himself of his duty and the importance of discretion, especially when entering a space as personal as Camilla's closet. Camilla herself was still completely unaware. She moved gracefully within her private quarters, selecting her accessories for the day with careful attention to detail. Her mind was full of upcoming engagements, speeches, and the small tasks she had planned for the morning. The idea that someone might be quietly moving through her closet was completely foreign to her. To her, the palace was orderly, predictable, and secure, a space where routines and protocols protected every member of the royal family. Charlotte's eyes sparkled with anticipation. She had imagined every detail, rehearsed every possible scenario, and now watched in quiet delight as her plan moved into the next stage. Her small body leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the door, and she waited for the moment that Thomas would step inside. In her mind, the adventure was perfectly balanced between curiosity and control, and the excitement of seeing it unfold made her heart beat faster. Thomas opened the door slowly, the polished brass handle cold under his gloved hand. He stepped inside with measured, careful movements, his shoes making no sound on the soft carpet. The closet was larger than he had imagined, filled with neat rows of dresses, carefully arranged shoes, and sparkling accessories that reflected the morning sunlight filtering through a small window. Each item was perfectly in place, a testament to the Duchess's careful attention to detail. Thomas's trained eyes scanned the room, noting the patterns, colors, and textures, all the while remaining alert for anything unusual. The air inside the closet was filled with a mixture of fragrances, fresh linen, subtle perfumes, and the faint scent of polished wood. Thomas moved slowly, almost reverently, through the space, careful not to disturb anything. His movements were deliberate, precise, and disciplined, reflecting years of training and a deep respect for both duty and privacy. Yet, even as he moved with care, he could not help but notice the beauty and elegance of the room. Dresses in every color of the rainbow hung neatly on racks, shoes sparkled like tiny jewels, and accessories were arranged with meticulous care. From her window, Charlotte could hardly contain her excitement. She watched every step, every gesture, and every pause that Thomas took. The thrill of anticipation, the quiet tension, and the sense of influence she felt from her small gesture combined to make this moment unforgettable. She understood that her curiosity was not just about the closet or the items inside. It was about understanding the reactions, observing the discipline, and learning the subtle ways the palace operated. Thomas paused near a rack of particularly striking dresses. He noted the fabric, texture, and patterns, all while remaining completely silent. His focus was unwavering. He knew that his presence here was unusual, that the closet was a personal and private space, and that discretion was paramount. Yet he also understood that the princess's signal had called him here, and that responding correctly was as important as the task itself. Charlotte leaned forward slightly, her small hands gripping the edge of the window seat. Her eyes widened as she imagined Thomas carefully moving through the closet, examining each detail and ensuring that everything was in order. She felt a sense of satisfaction, pride, and delight all at once. Her plan had worked perfectly so far, and the unfolding scene was more entertaining than she had imagined. Camilla, still unaware of the guard's presence, reached for a hat from a shelf nearby. She hummed softly, arranging her morning items in a deliberate and thoughtful manner. To her, the palace was calm, familiar, and orderly. The contrast between her perception and the quiet activity occurring just beyond her awareness added a subtle layer of tension to the scene, one that Charlotte enjoyed observing silently from her window. Thomas's movements were careful, measured, and almost reverent. He checked the alignment of the dresses, adjusted a pair of shoes that had shifted slightly, and ensured that everything was exactly as it should be. His trained eyes missed nothing. He was fully aware of the importance of his role, the significance of the princess's signal, and the delicate balance between duty and respect. Every action, every step, and every gesture was guided by a combination of training, discipline, and intuition. Charlotte's excitement grew with each passing moment. She imagined the Duchess entering the room, noticing Thomas, and reacting with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and amusement. The thought made her giggle softly, her small body trembling with quiet delight. She had orchestrated a scene that combined discipline, elegance, and a touch of playful mischief, and she felt a profound sense of satisfaction at seeing it unfold exactly as she had envisioned. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the fine details of the closet, the sparkle of the dresses, and the polished surfaces of the furniture. The quiet hum of the heating system, the distant sounds from other parts of the palace, and the soft footsteps of Thomas combined to create a sense of anticipation and tension. Every element of the environment seemed to emphasize the importance of the moment, the elegance of the space, and the playful intelligence of the princess orchestrating the scene. As Thomas moved toward the center of the room, he paused to examine a particularly intricate dress. The fabric shimmered softly in the morning light, and the detail of the stitching reflected the care and craftsmanship that went into its creation. He took a deep breath, appreciating the beauty of the item while remaining fully aware of his duty. His presence in the room was discreet, silent, and respectful, guided entirely by the princess's signal and his own understanding of the balance between privacy and responsibility. Charlotte, from her window, could see the slight movements, the careful gestures, and the measured steps of Thomas. She felt a sense of power, curiosity, and amusement all at once. Her small plan had created a scene that combined elegance, discipline, and playful mischief. The thrill of observing the guard's actions, the beauty of the closet, and the unfolding potential of Camilla's reaction made her heart race with excitement. Camilla, finally turning toward the closet, noticed a subtle shift. At first, she thought she might be imagining it, a trick of the light or the play of shadows across the room. But as she approached, she realized that something unusual was happening. A guard, disciplined, focused, and completely composed, was quietly moving through her personal space. Her eyes widened in surprise, a soft gasp escaping her lips. The unexpected presence caught her off guard, yet she quickly assessed the situation with grace, poise, and understanding. Thomas, noticing that he had been discovered, paused and straightened his posture. His movements remained disciplined, respectful, and controlled. He understood the importance of maintaining composure, especially in the presence of someone as important as the Duchess. His training, experience, and understanding of royal protocol guided every action, ensuring that the situation remained calm, orderly, and respectful. Charlotte's eyes sparkled with delight. She had anticipated this moment, the recognition, the surprise, and the subtle amusement that would follow. The quiet tension, the playful mischief, and the unfolding scene combined to create a moment that would remain in her memory for years to come. The morning, which had begun quietly, had transformed into a scene of intrigue, curiosity, and playful adventure, all orchestrated by a clever little princess. Camilla's eyes widened as she realized a guard was quietly moving through her private closet. For a moment, she simply froze, unsure whether to be alarmed or amused. She had spent years understanding the protocols and routines of the royal household, but a situation like this was unusual, to say the least. The disciplined man in uniform paused immediately upon seeing her, standing perfectly straight, his expression serious yet respectful. His presence was not threatening, but it was unexpected, and Camilla's mind raced to understand why he was there. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte watched from her window with barely contained excitement. She had imagined every detail of this moment countless times in her mind, and now she could see it unfolding exactly as she had planned. Her small hands clutched the edge of the window seat, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She felt a thrilling sense of power in orchestrating this tiny adventure. Every subtle gesture, every movement, and every expression mattered, and she observed them all with the careful attention of someone much older than her years. Camilla took a slow, composed breath. She had learned long ago that in the royal household, unusual events required calm, measured reactions. She tilted her head slightly, observing the guard, and tried to make sense of the situation without overreacting. Her mind noted the precision of his movements, the seriousness in his eyes, and the respectfulness of his posture. It was clear that he was following instructions, though she could not yet determine whose instructions those might be. Thomas, the guard, remained disciplined and calm. He had been trained to respond to royal signals without hesitation, and he knew that discretion and respect were critical at every step. Even though Camilla had noticed him, he did not break his composure. His hands were steady at his sides, and his posture remained perfect. He knew that explaining the situation in the wrong words or at the wrong moment could cause confusion, so he waited patiently, his eyes shifting subtly toward the closet's organization, confirming that nothing had been disturbed. Princess Charlotte suppressed a giggle as she watched the scene unfold. Her plan had worked perfectly so far. She had orchestrated a scenario in which a disciplined guard had entered her aunt's private space, moved with precision, and now stood silently in front of her, all because of a subtle signal she had given. The thrill of observing the reactions, the carefully measured movements, and the quiet tension was almost too much for her young mind to contain. Camilla finally spoke, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. "Thomas," she said, addressing the guard, "may I ask why you are in my closet?" Her tone was gentle, yet there was a hint of playful amusement. She was a woman accustomed to protocol and decorum, and she understood that patience and grace were essential in unexpected situations. Her words were carefully chosen, aiming to understand without reprimand. Thomas straightened slightly, acknowledging her question with a respectful nod. "Your Grace," he said in his steady, disciplined voice, "I am here in response to a signal from Princess Charlotte." His explanation was precise, factual, and devoid of unnecessary emotion. He understood that the royal household valued clarity, discretion, and honesty, and he delivered his words in a way that respected both Camilla and the princess. Camilla's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. She had anticipated a minor confusion or perhaps an accidental intrusion, but the involvement of Princess Charlotte added an entirely new layer to the situation. She quickly assessed the scene, noting that everything in the closet remained perfectly in place. No dress was disturbed, no shoes were out of order, and the room retained its usual elegance. The discipline and respect of the guard were evident in every detail, and she found herself quietly impressed by his professionalism. From her window, Charlotte watched the interaction with delight. She had anticipated this moment, the discovery, the polite exchange, and the subtle amusement that would follow. The combination of discipline, elegance, and playful mischief created a scene that was both tense and entertaining. Charlotte's small heart raced with excitement as she realized that her plan had created a memorable moment, one that would likely be talked about quietly among palace staff for days to come. Camilla's surprise slowly shifted into amusement. A soft smile spread across her face as she regarded Thomas and then glanced toward the window, where she imagined Charlotte might be watching. She understood that the princess had orchestrated this moment, and while the situation was unusual, it was also charming. There was a warmth to the young princess's cleverness, a subtle intelligence that shone through even in a playful act. Camilla allowed herself to appreciate the ingenuity behind it, recognizing that curiosity and cleverness were qualities to be nurtured, even when they resulted in unexpected events. Thomas, noticing the change in Camilla's expression, relaxed slightly. He remained disciplined, but the tension in the room eased as he saw that the Duchess understood the nature of the situation. His actions, guided by the princess's signal and his own careful judgment, had maintained respect, discretion, and order. Every step, every gesture, and every pause had been executed with precision, ensuring that the moment remained dignified even as it contained an element of surprise. Charlotte, leaning forward with a wide smile, imagined the conversation unfolding between Thomas and Camilla. She pictured the gentle amusement on Camilla's face, the quiet satisfaction of seeing everything in order, and the respectful composure of the guard. The scene was more entertaining than anything she had anticipated, and the thrill of witnessing it unfold in real time was almost overwhelming. Camilla's voice softened, her tone reflecting both curiosity and gentle amusement. "Princess Charlotte is quite clever," she said thoughtfully, addressing Thomas without raising her voice. "It seems she has found a way to get attention and test the limits of her influence, even while remaining discreet." Her words carried a sense of admiration for the young princess's intelligence and subtle planning. She understood that Charlotte's actions were guided by curiosity and playfulness, and she appreciated the care with which the signal had been executed. Thomas nodded respectfully, acknowledging Camilla's observation. "Indeed, Your Grace," he said. "Princess Charlotte's signals are always deliberate, and she has a remarkable understanding of timing and discretion. I responded as instructed, ensuring that nothing was disturbed." His words reflected both professionalism and quiet admiration for the princess's cleverness. He understood that his role was to support, protect, and respond appropriately, and he took pride in executing his duties flawlessly. Charlotte, hearing these imagined words in her mind, giggled softly. The satisfaction of seeing her plan succeed, the careful attention of the guard, and the gentle acknowledgement from Camilla created a moment that was both exciting and rewarding. The morning, which had begun quietly and predictably, had transformed into an adventure filled with subtle tension, clever planning, and unexpected delight. Camilla, noticing that nothing had been disturbed and that the guard had acted with perfect respect, allowed herself to fully appreciate the situation. She thought of the young princess, perched somewhere nearby, and felt a warmth in her heart. The combination of discipline, cleverness, and curiosity made Charlotte's actions both understandable and charming. Camilla realized that while the moment had been surprising, it was also a testament to the intelligence and creativity of the child. Thomas, standing quietly, observed Camilla's reaction. He understood that his role was not only to respond to the princess's signal, but also to maintain decorum and respect in the presence of the Duchess. Every action he took had been deliberate, ensuring that the situation remained calm, orderly, and dignified. His training and experience allowed him to balance duty, discretion, and responsiveness perfectly. Charlotte's eyes sparkled as she imagined the scene. She pictured Camilla smiling, Thomas standing with perfect composure, and herself quietly observing from the window. The thrill of having orchestrated such a moment, the careful balance of tension and amusement, and the realization that her small gesture had created a memorable experience all combined to make her heart race with delight. Camilla finally smiled fully, the tension replaced by gentle amusement. "Well, it seems we have a clever little strategist in our midst," she said softly, her voice reflecting both warmth and humor. "Perhaps I should pay closer attention to these subtle signals in the future." Her words, though calm, carried an acknowledgement of the princess's intelligence and the playful ingenuity of her actions. Thomas nodded, maintaining his disciplined posture. "Of course, Your Grace," he replied. "Princess Charlotte is always precise in her intentions. I will continue to respond as needed, ensuring that her instructions are followed carefully and respectfully." His tone was calm, measured, and professional, reflecting the combination of duty, discretion, and admiration for the young princess's cleverness. Charlotte from her window allowed herself a triumphant smile. She had anticipated this moment, the discovery, the polite exchange, and the subtle amusement that followed. Her plan had succeeded perfectly, creating a memorable scene filled with elegance, discipline, and playful mischief. The morning had begun quietly and predictably, but it had transformed into a moment of intrigue, observation, and subtle delight. The palace was quiet once more, but the air still held a sense of excitement from the morning's unusual events. Princess Charlotte sat by her window, her small frame curled into the seat as she watched the garden below. Her brown eyes sparkled with satisfaction, and a tiny smile lingered on her lips. The thrill of orchestrating the morning's adventure, the secret signal, the careful movements of the guard, and the reactions of Camilla still hummed quietly in her mind. It was a small victory, a game of subtle intelligence and observation, and she had won. Camilla, in her private quarters, was settling back into her routine, though she could not entirely shake a soft smile. The incident had been unexpected, yes, but it had also been charming, filled with cleverness and a playful intelligence that reminded her of the joy and curiosity children bring into the world. She carefully reflected on the situation, considering the discipline of the guard, the precision of the princess, and the calm resolution of the moment. Despite the initial surprise, she found herself quietly amused, appreciating the subtle artistry of a small adventure orchestrated by a young mind. The palace staff, though unaware of the full details, had sensed the unusual tension in the halls that morning. Whispers of the event floated quietly from one corridor to another, as if the building itself had absorbed the excitement and was now sharing it in hushed tones. A disciplined guard responding to a tiny princess's signal, the brief intrusion into private quarters, the delicate balance between protocol and mischief, all of it became a quietly amusing story within the palace walls. Those who had noticed the unusual movements smiled knowingly at one another, understanding that sometimes even the most serious spaces could host moments of charm and unpredictability. Thomas, the guard, returned to his usual duties with his posture perfect and movements precise, though he carried a subtle awareness that something unusual had taken place. His mind reflected on the sequence of events, the signal, the careful approach, the quiet presence in the closet, and the delicate handling of the discovery by Camilla. It had been a test, in a way, a small test of observation, discipline, and discretion. And in his professional judgment, it had been executed flawlessly. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing he had upheld his duty with integrity while respecting the nuances of palace life. Charlotte, meanwhile, remained at her window, replaying the scene in her mind. She imagined Camilla's soft smile, Thomas's disciplined movements, and the quiet order that had been maintained despite the unusual circumstances. There was a sense of pride in her chest, a satisfaction that came from orchestrating a small, clever adventure that respected rules while exploring curiosity. She had learned something important about timing, observation, and the power of subtle influence. In her own way, she understood that intelligence and playfulness could coexist, creating experiences that were both memorable and meaningful. Camilla, sensing the quiet aftermath of the morning's events, reflected further on the lessons contained in this playful adventure. She realized that moments of curiosity, even when expressed in unexpected ways, were opportunities to teach, observe, and encourage growth. Princess Charlotte's actions had been guided by curiosity, creativity, and careful planning, and they had been executed without harm or disruption. In this, Camilla saw an example of the balance between discipline and imagination, responsibility and freedom. It was a small lesson in life, delivered quietly in a palace corridor, that she would remember and cherish. Thomas moved through the halls with careful attention, returning to his routine duties with a heightened awareness of the subtle dynamics at play in the palace. His thoughts lingered on the morning's events, considering the interplay between discretion, duty, and the unexpected cleverness of a child. He understood that his role extended beyond simple security. It included observing, understanding, and responding to the nuances of behavior, signals, and intentions within the royal household. The morning had reinforced this lesson, highlighting the value of attentiveness, patience, and professional judgment. Charlotte's mind wandered to the idea of future adventures. She thought about other moments where subtle signals could create small, clever outcomes, and she imagined the possibilities. Each day in the palace presented opportunities for observation, curiosity, and creativity, and she felt eager to explore them. Yet, she also understood the importance of discretion, patience, and respect for others. Her small adventure with the secret signal and the closet had been a perfect example of how intelligence and curiosity could be expressed safely, respectfully, and with a touch of fun. Camilla, reflecting on her niece's cleverness, decided to take a quiet moment to appreciate the child's intelligence. There was a warmth in knowing that Princess Charlotte could plan, observe, and influence events in such a subtle and thoughtful way. It was a reminder that even in the structured, disciplined world of the palace, there was room for creativity, cleverness, and playful ingenuity. Camilla smiled softly, thinking about the lessons of patience, observation, and gentle humor that this small incident had provided. Thomas continued his rounds, disciplined as ever, yet with a quiet sense of fulfillment. He understood that the morning's events had been unusual, yes, but they had also highlighted the subtle complexities of palace life. A simple signal, a disciplined response, and careful observation had created a moment of learning, amusement, and respect. The balance between duty and discretion, protocol and playfulness had been maintained flawlessly, and Thomas took pride in having been part of this unique experience. Charlotte, sitting by her window, felt a small sense of accomplishment. Her careful planning, her understanding of signals, and her observation of the palace environment had led to a successful and memorable adventure. She had tested her skills in patience, creativity, and subtle influence, and she had succeeded without causing harm or disruption. The experience had been thrilling, and it had reinforced the value of intelligence, preparation, and careful execution. Camilla finally spoke aloud, breaking the quiet with a soft, amused voice. "It seems we have a young strategist in our midst," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her words carried warmth, admiration, and gentle humor. She had seen the cleverness of Princess Charlotte, the professionalism of Thomas, and the subtle balance of discipline and playfulness that had defined the morning's events. The words reflected her understanding that life, even in a structured environment like the palace, could be enriched by curiosity, intelligence, and moments of gentle mischief. Charlotte, overhearing the faint sound of Camilla's voice as she returned to her usual space, giggled softly. She understood that her little adventure had been noticed and appreciated, even if only subtly. The combination of careful planning, discipline, and playful ingenuity had created a moment that was both memorable and meaningful. The morning had been transformed from a quiet routine into an experience filled with learning, observation, and delight. Thomas, having completed his tasks for the morning, reflected on the subtle lessons of the day. He understood that his role extended beyond simple security and protocol. It included interpreting signals, observing subtle cues, and responding with both discretion and intelligence. The small adventure orchestrated by Princess Charlotte had been a reminder of the importance of attentiveness, patience, and professionalism in every aspect of his duties. Camilla, returning fully to her morning routine, could not help but smile as she recalled the events. The unexpected intrusion, the disciplined response of the guard, and the clever orchestration by Princess Charlotte had created a memorable experience. It was a story that would remain quietly in her memory, a reminder of the charm, intelligence, and playful ingenuity that children bring into the world. The palace, with all its history and tradition, had been momentarily transformed into a stage for a subtle adventure, and she appreciated every detail. Charlotte leaned back in her window seat, satisfied with the morning's accomplishments. She had learned lessons about patience, observation, and the power of subtle influence. She had experienced the thrill of orchestrating a small adventure that respected rules, maintained discipline, and created moments of gentle amusement. The morning had been a success, a quiet triumph that reflected her intelligence, creativity, and understanding of the balance between curiosity and responsibility. Camilla, reflecting on the event, considered the importance of supporting curiosity while maintaining respect for privacy and order. The morning had demonstrated that intelligence and playfulness could coexist, creating experiences that were both educational and delightful. She thought about Princess Charlotte's cleverness, the guard's professionalism, and the quiet amusement that had followed. It was a small lesson in life, one that emphasized observation, respect, and the subtle joy of discovery. Thomas continued his duties with renewed awareness. He understood that the small adventure had reinforced important lessons about patience, discretion, and the interplay between curiosity and professionalism. He moved through the palace with precision, yet he carried a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had responded appropriately to an unusual situation. His actions had maintained order, respect, and dignity, all while acknowledging the cleverness of a young princess. Charlotte, finally satisfied, stood from her window seat and stretched lightly. The adventure was complete, but its lessons lingered in her mind. She understood that intelligence, observation, and playful ingenuity were qualities to be nurtured carefully. Her little morning adventure had been a success, not only because it had unfolded as planned, but because it had respected boundaries, maintained discipline, and created a memorable, joyful experience. The palace settled back into its usual rhythm, quiet and orderly, but the memory of the morning lingered in the hearts of those involved. Charlotte had orchestrated a clever plan, Thomas had executed his duties with precision, and Camilla had responded with grace, understanding, and amusement. Together, they had created a moment that was both playful and instructive, memorable and meaningful. As the sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the palace corridors, Charlotte allowed herself a quiet smile. She had learned, observed, and played with intelligence and respect. Camilla reflected on curiosity, discipline, and the joy that comes from observing cleverness in action. Thomas, ever vigilant, continued his duties with professionalism and satisfaction. And so the morning concluded, a small adventure, fully experienced, quietly remembered, and gently cherished.